Hi everyone, and welcome back to yet another installment in the AgilePoint Generative AI video series. In this video, we're going to show you how generative AI can create an entire process-based application in mere moments. So let's get started by heading over to the App Builder and adding an app. This time, rather than a form-based application, which you can see in other videos, we're going to select a process-based app. Let's give our application a name and drop it into a category. We'll give our process model a name. And we're going to leave the default selection of eForms. We'll give it a couple of swim lanes. Now, as you're seeing here, AgilePoint is asking me how I'd like to create my process. Would I like to use AI? So as you're seeing here in the disclaimer, this is going to result in a skeleton of my process application. It's going to give me the process, task forms, and a data entity. And from there, we can use the additional application builder components to fine-tune the application until it's production ready. We're going to provide a description of the application and a sample PDF to design our forms. And then from there, as we mentioned, we can dive into the builder and fine-tune the application. So of course, we want to use AI to create our application. And we're going to use Let AI Decide. Now, as we mentioned, we're going to build an employee interview application. So I'm going to provide my prompt. And AgilePoint is going to take a moment or two to build the skeleton process behind the scenes. Okay, so as you're seeing here, we have all of the tasks as well as the various swim lanes. So our first swim lane is going to be the initial screening, technical assessment, HR interview, and etc. Now, as you'd seen in prior videos, I can always adjust the suggestions that are made, reclassify activities as required. So as you're seeing on screen here, it's showing me the type of activity flowing into the next activity. Now, for any one of these, it doesn't have to be linear processing. I can have parallel processing as an example. So if I wanted this to branch out into two concurrently active activities, I can certainly do so. And across the top, you're seeing here that I can always rename or remove the swim lanes that were suggested. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring in an additional activity. So by clicking the plus icon, you're seeing here that I have common activities, human tasks, as well as connectors to external systems. So what we can do in our case is scroll down and find data entity as an example, and add an activity for creating a record. So what I'm going to do here, because I've added a new activity, I want to connect my collect basic information to the create record activity. And since we don't need the pre-screening questions, I can go ahead and remove that. And then we're going to clean up the create record and connect that to the technical skills test. For any human activity, I have the option to further configure it now, or I can do it later on in the designer. I can give this an SLA. I can navigate down to participants. In my case here, you're seeing process initiator is already configured, so I'm going to leave this as is. But again, we can always do this later on in the designer. Okay, so everything else so far is looking pretty good here. I think I'm going to leave the technical assessment as it is, schedule an HR interview and conduct the interview. And then down below, we have our decision making. So here, rather than make an offer, I want to morph this from a standard task into an email. Okay, so we're going to change this from make offer to make hiring decision. And we're going to add a new activity. That's going to be a condition check to check the decision. And let's go ahead and add one more activity to notify candidates that they've been selected. Okay, so we're going to clean this up a little bit here. We're going to change this from notify rejected to check the decision. And as you're seeing here down below, we have a notify rejected candidates standard task. We're going to change that to an email. And lastly, I'm going to add a new lane. We'll click edit. Notifications. And I'm going to move down the 2 notification steps to underneath the new swim lane. Okay, so let's go ahead and configure our condition here. If hired, we're going to go to the notify hired activity. Otherwise, we're going to notify a rejection. Now, if you're familiar with AgilePoint, you know that you can add multiple rules together, as well as change where the else or incoming sequence is shown. For my purposes, I'm going to go ahead and leave this as it is and click Save. Okay, so as we mentioned earlier, what we're doing here is really creating a skeleton. So if everything isn't exactly right, don't worry, we can always make changes later on. So for now, let's go ahead and select Next. And as you're seeing here, AgilePoint is asking me if I'd like to build my forms using AI or build them the old-fashioned way. Okay, so as a next step, I'm going to create my form using AI. Now you may have seen this in prior videos where we created a form-based application around a PDF. We're going to use that same employment application for this scenario. Now I have multiple different ways that I can create my form using AI. I can use a prompt, image, or Excel sheet, but as we mentioned, let's go ahead and use PDF for today. And of course, I can browse through a number of existing repositories, or I can simply drag and drop it from my file structure. So as you're seeing here, AgilePoint has now suggested the various fields that we can use for our application. So let's go through it and see if there's any reclassifying that we should do. So here under phone, we can change that to a phone number. Email address is good as an email. I'm going to go ahead and change address to a type of text area. And we can remove address line 2. Okay, so city is going to be fine. For region, we can change that. I know that I have a pick list for region and country code. So as you're seeing here, it's selected as a drop-down list, and then I'll simply configure it. And AgilePoint recognizes that I already have a pick list that's suitable for this use case. So I can select yes and accept the suggestion, or say no and have AgilePoint automatically generate values for my drop-down list. So as you're seeing here, this looks pretty good, but again, can always generate new options. So next, that brings us to postal code. A text box would work, but I know I have a better option here from a validation perspective with postal code. Okay, and scrolling further through the list, country, now, as you might recall from our PDF, it's linear in nature, but as you're seeing here, we're breaking this up into different sections of our form. Okay, so scrolling through the rest of the list, everything is looking good here. I'm going to go back to how are you referred to us. That's a pick list here. So I'm going to select from an existing pick list. How are you referred to us? Okay, now by default, it's given me a 2-column layout, which is fine. I can always make changes to that if I'd like, but you'll notice here that I have an option to show the line breaks. So this is going to show the logical groupings within the form where fields are shown next to one another. Okay, so moving right along here, we're going to select Next. I'm going to give my entity a unique name. And as you're seeing here, I have an option to specify my primary key. Now, in this case, it suggested the first name of the candidate, but I'm going to rather change that to the email address. Okay, so next, AgilePoint is asking me which forms I'd like to create for the human tasks. Now, in my case, it might not make sense to use that form layout for something like the technical skills test or the code review, while the general candidate information might be handy for the other activities within this process. Next, AgilePoint is taking me to a list of common application artifacts. Again, I don't need to set this up now. I can always do it later. But if you're a newer AgilePoint application developer, this is handy to have this checklist. I'm going to go with default security. Again, I can always change that later on. And now AgilePoint is assembling the application, and it's going to drop me into the application designer, where I can make the last remaining tweaks, publish, and begin using my application. Okay, so as you can see, I've been dropped into the application designer, and my skeleton process is looking pretty good. Now, there is still a few remaining areas where I need some configuration, as an example with our data entity insert, as well as a few of the forms, namely the technical skills test and code review. But if we look into our start task here, we're going to see that the form has been fully wired up and is ready to go. Let's go ahead and bring this up in preview just to test the functionality. So as you can see here, my date controls are working well, my drop-down lists are populated, and my checkboxes are all set. Okay, so with that being said, this is going to conclude this video covering generative AI for creating process-based applications. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.